Marketplace Africa. I'm Robin Kerner. Now, they're called repats, expatriates who've left the continent and are now returning home. Some African countries are experiencing double-digit growth. There's the perception that there are more opportunities here in Africa than elsewhere. So Western-educated Africans are turning their backs on cash-strapped European countries to bring their expertise, their experiences and their degrees back home. Nkapile Mabuse now reports from Nigeria.
It's a far cry from the fancy offices of the big financial firms that employed him in Britain. But 33-year-old Joshua Egba's business degrees are proving more useful at home. He left Nigeria 10 years ago to further his studies in London.
Things weren't really happening in Nigeria in about 2002. People were going to the UK for better opportunities.
6 years later, that picture changed completely. When the global financial crisis hit, fear set in.
Businesses are laying staff off. The government is laying staff off. So you're not safe. So I thought, well, I think really it's time for me to go home because I'm hearing all these stories, all these success stories coming from Nigeria, coming from Africa.
Here, 2008 was a turnaround year. Government reforms boosted an economy that has continued to grow. In the past 3 years, the oil-rich West African nation has seen growth of more than 7%, while Europe continues to shrink under the weight of austerity. But many Nigerians lack the skills needed to make their enterprises profitable.
Like now, for instance, like for this one.
With his economics and international business degrees, Egba is helping entrepreneurs invest wisely and run their companies efficiently.
In Nigeria, if you wanted to get into a business, it was just a question of what is the vogue business, what is reigning right now, what are people doing? Like, for instance, somebody say, well, right now, taxis, cab services are doing well. And then you'd see somebody going off to buy 2 cabs and then putting them on the road without doing a proper business analysis. You don't know what your return on investment is. You don't know how long it's going to take you to pay back. So all of a sudden, I was given advice on these types of things. So people were receptive, and I've been pleasantly surprised by the fact that people want to change the way that they do business. Hello, good morning. Yeah, how are you doing now? Yeah, we just need
that change has filtered through to government. Nigeria's central bank has also called for assistance.
I worked with one of their a training session on international financial reporting standards. Because one of the key criticisms that I know of the Nigerian government is accountability. Somebody's giving money and he's not, at the end of the day, asked to account for exactly how that money was spent. We have a budget, but at the end of the day, we don't have a budget reappraisal, so to speak.
Microbiologist Tunde Ogunrinde is another Nigerian trying to lift standards.
Hey, how are you? You all right? How's it going?
He spent nearly 20 years in Europe, most of it working for Burger King, training and managing staff. Here, he says, it's all about changing mindsets.
I think a lot of it is just what is best practice. What does good look like? If you don't know what good looks like, then, you accept anything else.
Ogunrinde was recruited by an employment agency trying to entice the estimated 2 million Nigerians living in Europe to come back to Africa.
I haven't worked in an industry which was already established in Europe. There was very little, there was less creativity. I mean, you see where we're sitting in. This is the effort of, sitting with my MD, who is very visionary, sitting with the architects, challenging each other and looking at the plans and looking at the designs and saying what works well in this environment, what materials are hard wearing. That is exciting when you're creating.
But competition at home is getting stiffer as established international brands expand aggressively into Africa. They too drawn by growing opportunities.
There are lots of examples where foreign brands have gone in and they haven't been able to shift the local brand because there's an affinity, there's a taste profile, which, we've established. But most importantly, really, the battle is really around winning the hearts and minds of customers.
Amidst this brain gain boom, there are still millions more professionals in the diaspora put off by the daily inconveniences of living here. Traffic, power cuts, corruption, and the general struggle to get things done quickly.
That is all set up okay.
Ogunrinde says he was lucky to return to a well-established and organized industry, but that more needs to be done to make it more appealing for doctors, nurses, and lecturers that are so badly needed in the country to come back.
The government really needs to put in more of an enabling environment for those industries to lure back not just people like myself in the retail and hospitality industry, but also in those industries.
In Nigeria, they call them repats.
It's about 15.
They speak a little differently, but their passion for their country is unquestionable. Even after decades away, to them, there's still nothing like home.
Absolutely. Home, good food, rice and beans, you know, the jollof rice and some of the meals we do. Absolutely, nothing like home.
As African returnees flee the European financial crisis, we speak to the CEO of a recruitment agency working between London and Nigeria and ask him what's changed in the jobs market. It used to be difficult to try and lure Europe's top graduates to come and work here in Africa. But that all changed, says the CEO of the recruitment agency Find a Job in Africa after the collapse of Lehman Brothers and the European financial crisis. Well, for this week's FaceTime, we sit down with Funto Akinkugbe, and he tells us how his agency is capitalizing on Africa's increasingly attractive jobs market.
I think for me the most interesting part to start with is how this all came about. The recruiting of people here to go to Africa. What was the spark for you?
The spark, I wanted to go back. My colleague wanted to go back. That's Dr. Banjoko, who we started this together. That started way, I was early 2000, 2001, 2002. We wanted to go back to Africa. And we said, we looked around at the other platforms out there that actually showcases opportunities in African countries. There were none. So we said, you know what, let's create something that will service the African market. So we came up with Find a Job in Africa.
But you couldn't have done this if there hadn't been a stability returning to the region. I mean, you can have the best ideas in the world, but if people don't want to go, so what changed in sub-Saharan Africa to allow you to do that?
Well, the political landscape started changing. You had a situation in Nigeria whereby, for the first time in a long time, you had a democratically elected government in power. And essentially, in addition to that as well, you now had a situation whereby telecoms was actually becoming a major player in African countries. The capacity to build was actually an issue. They didn't have enough people locally who can actually provide the skill set. So through the creation of the portal, we're able to assist a lot of the telecommunications organization to be able to attract skills to opportunities that they have in African countries. That's how it started.
Was it easy to explain that to people here in Europe to recruit to go to Africa, or was that as big of a selling job as it was to the African company?
It actually, well, it was actually easier for the African companies because the African companies already had a global mentality. They wanted to recruit, they wanted to compete, but attracting the skill sets was actually an issue because saying to someone, hey, guess what? Jump on the next plane to Africa wasn't exactly exciting. But saying that, at the end of the day, most of these organizations were able to wave carrots in front of the potential candidates. The packages that they were putting together to attract good talents was very attractive.
How soon do you think it'll be in years where the people that are working in Africa will then go the opposite direction? In other words, there'll be so much skill set there that they'll be wanted elsewhere.
It's already happening. You already have that because if the skill sets are sought after, which is the case right now, the skills are already moving around. You have a situation whereby I do have friends who were initially working in an African country, say for example, they're working in Uganda, Sierra Leone, they're now working in Iran. And some of them actually working in England. That just shows you the trend in terms of what is now happening.
And where's that trend going now, do you think? I mean, should we just stop looking at it as saying African this or Africa that or Europe this? It's all global, and it should be that people are moving around very frequently.
I would say yes and no to a certain extent. I think because of the current situation that you have in terms of you don't have a level playing field at the moment across, or should I say globally, Africa still needs a couple of handicaps to start off with to allow it to be able to catch up to a certain extent. Obviously, in terms of being able to catch up, rests on the shoulders of the government, providing more, what I would say is a competitive environment, good governance, for example, infrastructure, and all the things that the government needs to actually put in place for any kind of growth to actually happen.
It's fascinating to see that you're able to feel that things are stable enough in that region to be able to recruit people and bring people, and you yourself wanting to go back. That can change though, or is it not going to change?
Anything can change anywhere. Right now you have a situation globally that, economically speaking, it's precarious. To a certain extent, with good governance, Africa will do well. It all hinges on the governance. The leaders themselves are actually willing to create an enabling environment whereby business can actually thrive.
Well, that's it for this week's show. I'm Robin Kerner. You can find us online at cnn.com/marketplaceafrica. Until next week.